The evening air hung cool and crisp as the sun set behind the sprawling mansion on Hillcrest Drive. The property belonged to Richard Kwan, a man whose name appeared regularly on the front pages of business magazines and whose net worth could fund a small country. Tonight his estate was alive with twinkling lights, soft music, and the murmur of expensive conversations. Among the sea of designer dresses and tailored suits moved Mei Lin, a slender figure in the standard black and white uniform of the catering staff. At 19 years old, she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite being practically invisible to the wealthy guests she served. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her movements efficient and precise as she balanced a tray of champagne flutes. Mei wasn't supposed to be here, not really. She belonged in a practice room at Westlake Music Academy, where a scholarship covered her tuition but little else. These catering gigs were how she paid for her tiny apartment, her bus fare, and occasionally, actual food that wasn't instant noodles. More champagne on the East Terrace, came the hurried instruction from Luis, the catering manager. And for heaven's sake, smile more. These people are paying enough to see happy faces. Mei nodded and adjusted her expression, though smiling felt like the last thing she wanted to do after a 14-hour day that had started with a 5 a.m. practice session before her morning classes. Her fingers ached from yesterday's intense rehearsal of Bach's Partita No. 2. But those same fingers now needed to carry trays, not dance across piano keys. The East Terrace overlooked immaculate gardens that stretched toward the ocean. Standing near the stone balustrade was Richard Kwan himself, surrounded by a small crowd hanging on his every word. At 48, he had the sharp features and calculating eyes of someone who viewed every interaction as a potential transaction. His success in creating a revolutionary AI-driven financial platform had made him not just wealthy, but powerful enough to believe the world existed for his entertainment. The problem with classical music today, he was saying as Mei approached with her tray, is that institutions keep lowering their standards. They hand out scholarships based on diversity quotas rather than actual talent. Several guests nodded in agreement while others sipped their drinks uncomfortably. None contradicted him. The last concert I attended at Westlake was embarrassing, Kwan continued. Students stumbling through pieces that should be flawless. It's what happens when you prioritize feel-good stories over excellence. Mei's hand trembled slightly as she offered champagne to the group. Westlake was her home, her future. The place that had recognized something in her playing when everyone else said a girl from her background should focus on more practical skills. She bit her tongue and kept her expression neutral. "Champagne, sir?" she asked, approaching Kwan last. He barely glanced at her as he reached for a glass, but then his sharp eyes caught something, the small pin on her lapel, a golden piano key with the Westlake emblem. It was a simple thing, given to all scholarship students, and wearing it while working wasn't strictly professional, but it was Mei's small reminder to herself during long serving shifts of who she really was. "Well, what do we have here?" Kwan said, his voice carrying across the terrace. "One of Westlake's own, serving my guests." The conversation around them quieted. Mei felt heat rising in her cheeks but maintained her composure, the way her grandmother had taught her. Head up, shoulders back, face calm. "Yes, sir. I'm a student there," she replied simply, hoping the conversation would end. It didn't. Kwan's lips curved into what might have been a smile but looked more like a predator sizing up prey. "Piano performance, I'm guessing?" "Based on your pin?" "Yes, sir. How fascinating. Tell me, do they still teach actual technique there, or is it all about expressing yourself now?" Several people chuckled. Mei remained still, the heavy tray balanced perfectly in her left hand. She'd faced worse than this man's condescension. The instructor who'd told her mother that Mei's hands were too small for serious piano. The classmate who'd suggested she'd received her scholarship because Westlake needed ethnic diversity. The countless people who assumed her precision came from being naturally disciplined rather than from the thousands of hours she'd sacrificed. "We study both technique and expression." "Sir," she answered politely. Kwan's eyebrow raised slightly, perhaps surprised that she'd responded at all. Most servers knew to stay silent in the face of client remarks. But there was something in Mei that couldn't let the slight against Westlake stand. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Mei couldn't be sure if it was truly an accident or something more deliberate. As a waiter passed behind her with a tray of empty glasses, Mei stepped slightly aside to make room. Her elbow brushed against Kwan's arm, causing his champagne to slosh over the rim of his glass, landing on his crisp white shirt and the sleeve of his custom suit jacket. "I'm so sorry, sir," May gasped, immediately placing her tray down and grabbing a napkin from her apron pocket. Kwan's face darkened. "For God's sake," he snapped, snatching the napkin from her hand. "Is this the kind of coordination they teach at your precious academy?" The guests around them shifted uncomfortably. Some moved away, pretending not to notice the unfolding scene. Others watched with the detached interest of people observing an accident on the highway. "I apologize, Mr. Kwan. I'll get more napkins right away," May said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This job paid half her rent. She couldn't afford to lose it. "Don't bother," he said coldly. Then a strange expression crossed his face as he dabbed at his sleeve. It was the look of someone who'd just had an amusing thought, though nothing about his smile suggested actual warmth. "Actually, I'm curious about something." May waited, feeling increasingly uneasy. "My guests came here expecting quality entertainment," Kwan said, voice raised enough that now everyone on the terrace was listening. "Since you're a scholarship student at this supposedly excellent institution, perhaps you could provide it," May blinked, not understanding at first. Kwan gestured toward the French doors leading into the main hall. "There's a Steinway in the drawing room, a $500,000 instrument that mostly sits there for show. Since you've managed to spill champagne on a suit that costs more than your tuition, the least you could do is justify your scholarship by playing something for us." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. May stood perfectly still, aware of every eye on her, every whispered comment. "Richard, really?" said a woman in a midnight blue dress, her diamond earrings catching the light as she shook her head. "The girl is working. I'm sure the catering company wouldn't appreciate—" "I'm paying for the catering company," Kwan interrupted. "And now I'm requesting a slight change to this evening's entertainment." He turned back to May. "Unless, of course, your skills are limited to carrying trays and spilling drinks." The challenge hung in the air between them. May thought of Louise, who would be furious about this disruption. She thought of her grandmother, who had cleaned houses for rich families for 40 years and taught May to always keep her dignity, no matter how others treated her. She thought of the hours in practice rooms with bleeding fingers and aching wrists, of the nights spent studying theory instead of sleeping, and then, looking directly into Richard Kwan's eyes, May made her decision. "I'd be happy to play for you, Mr. Kwan," she said quietly. She sensed rather than saw Louise approaching, likely coming to defuse the situation and pull her back to work. But Kwan was already gesturing for his guest to follow him inside, making a grand show of this unexpected turn of events. "Excellent. Let's see if Westlake's standards are as deplorable as I suspect, or if perhaps they've managed to find some actual talent." As the crowd moved indoors, one of the older waiters caught May's eye and gave her a small nod that somehow conveyed both warning and encouragement. Louis appeared at her side, his expression a mix of concern and annoyance. "What do you think you're doing?" he whispered urgently. "I'm sorry, Louise, I don't have a choice," May replied softly. "He's making a point of humiliating me and insulting my school." "Then let him. That's part of this job sometimes. You smile, you take it, you go home and complain later." May shook her head slightly. "I can't, not about this." Before Louise could respond further, Kwan called back from the doorway. "We're waiting, pianist." With one apologetic glance at Louise, May straightened her uniform, took a deep breath, and followed the billionaire and his guests into the drawing room, where the gleaming black Steinway grand piano waited like a sleeping giant, about to become either her salvation or her downfall. The drawing room fell silent as May followed Richard Kwan inside. This was clearly a space designed to impress rather than comfort, with soaring ceilings, artwork that probably belonged in museums, and furniture that looked too perfect to actually use. In the center of it all stood the Steinway grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the crystal chandeliers above. Kwan's guests arranged themselves around the room, some perching on velvet couches while others remained standing, drinks in hand. Their expressions ranged from mild curiosity to second-hand embarrassment, to the barely disguised excitement of those hoping to witness a humiliating spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kwan announced with theatrical flair, "an unexpected addition to our evening's entertainment. This young lady works for the catering staff, but claims to be a scholarship student at Westlake Music Academy. She's kindly agreed to demonstrate what our donations to arts education are producing these days. The words claims to be stung May more than she wanted to admit, as if her presence at one of the country's most competitive music programs was something she might have invented. As if the calluses on her fingers and the thousands of hours of practice were fiction. Luis, the catering manager, hovered anxiously at the edge of the room. He caught May's eye and mouthed what looked like 2 minutes, holding up 2 fingers. A warning that she needed to make this quick and get back to work. May approached the piano, her serving uniform suddenly feeling even more out of place among the evening gowns and tailored suits. She could hear whispers, feel stares. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. When people expect you to be small, that's exactly when you must be big. She stood beside the piano for a moment, taking it in. This wasn't just any Steinway. It was a Model D concert grand, the kind most pianists only dreamed of playing. The kind that cost more than most homes. The irony wasn't lost on May that she'd spent years practicing on an old upright piano with sticky keys and a bench held together with duct tape. And now, in the most humiliating circumstance, she was being given access to an instrument of this caliber. "We don't have all evening," Quan said, checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. Perhaps something simple. Chopsticks, maybe? A few guests chuckled at his thinly veiled insult. May sat down at the bench and adjusted its height. Her hands hovered over the keys as she closed her eyes briefly, shutting out the room, the people, the circumstances. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she allowed herself to be fully present in her body. She felt the familiar tension in her shoulders that she needed to release. She felt the energy in her fingertips, the slight acceleration of her heartbeat that always came before she played. "What will you be playing for us?" asked an older woman with kind eyes, perhaps the only person in the room who seemed genuinely interested rather than ready to judge. Before May could answer, Quan cut in. "Something appropriate for her skill level, I'm sure. Perhaps Mary Had a Little Lamb." More laughter followed. May turned slightly toward the guests, her posture straight but not stiff. "I'll be playing the third movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata." The room shifted. Even those who knew little about classical piano recognized that this wasn't a beginner's piece. Quan's eyebrows rose slightly, his expression a mix of surprise and skepticism. "That's ambitious," he said, the edge in his voice now tinged with uncertainty. May placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes rang out, precise and controlled. The famous arpeggios filled the room with their urgent energy, building with a momentum that seemed to bend time itself. May's fingers flew across the keys with practiced precision, her body swaying slightly as she leaned into the more forceful passages. She had played this piece hundreds of times before, but never on an instrument like this. The Steinway responded to her touch as if it had been waiting for her, each note ringing with a clarity and depth that her practice piano could never produce. The sensation was intoxicating, like finally speaking in her true voice after years of whispering. As she navigated the complex runs and crashing chords, May felt something shift in the room. The whispering stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased. Even the servers who had been working around the edges of the room paused to listen. Quan stood near the piano, his expression unreadable. Gone was the smug smile, replaced by something more complex. Surprise, certainly, but also a reluctant recognition. He hadn't expected this. He had wanted to embarrass her, to prove his point about lowered standards and undeserving scholarship students. Instead, he was witnessing something undeniable. May lost herself in the music, forgetting momentarily about the expensive clothes surrounding her, the judgment, the precarious nature of her job and scholarship. There was only Beethoven's genius flowing through her fingers, only the beautiful monster of a piano responding to her touch, only the story she was telling through each perfectly executed phrase. When she hit the thunderous chords of the finale, her small frame somehow producing enough power to fill the cavernous room, several guests actually took a step back. The final notes hung in the air like a question awaiting an answer. The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt much longer. It was broken by the older woman with kind eyes who began to applaud with genuine enthusiasm. Others joined in, the applause growing from polite to appreciative to impressed. May stood and gave a small bow, her face flushed from exertion and emotion. Her eyes found Kwan's not in challenge or triumph, but simply to acknowledge that his test had been met. For a moment, something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps. Kwan gave a slight nod, the barest admission that he had misjudged. It wasn't an apology, but from a man like him, it might have been the closest thing to one. That was competent, he said, his voice lacking its earlier mockery. Coming from him, in this context, it was practically high praise. "Thank you for the opportunity to play on such a beautiful instrument," May replied, her voice quiet but steady. As she turned to leave, to return to her duties serving drinks and appetizers, a tall man stepped forward from the crowd. May recognized him immediately from posters and concert programs. Christopher Walsh, the renowned conductor of the City Symphony Orchestra. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying the slight accent of his native Poland, "may I ask who your teacher is at Westlake?" May felt a flutter of nervous excitement. "Professor Tanaka, sir." Walsh nodded as if this confirmed something. "Yumi Tanaka is exceptional. But so is your playing." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "Please call my office next week. I believe we should talk." A murmur went through the crowd. Richard Kwan watched this exchange with an unreadable expression, somewhere between annoyance and intrigue. May accepted the card with a slightly trembling hand. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh, I will." Luis appeared at her side, his earlier annoyance replaced with something like awe. "We need to get back to work," he said quietly, but without the urgency of before. As May followed him out of the drawing room, back to the kitchen where trays of desserts waited to be served, she felt different. Not triumphant exactly. There was still a long night of work ahead, and tomorrow would bring more classes, more practice, more financial stress. But something had shifted. In forcing her to play, Kwan had inadvertently given her a gift, the chance to be heard by someone who could actually change her future. Back in the drawing room, the party continued. Guests resumed their conversations. Champagne continued to flow, but the atmosphere had changed subtly. May had done more than play a difficult piece well. She had reminded everyone in that room that talent and worth weren't determined by uniform or status. Richard Kwan stood by the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys that May had just commanded so brilliantly. "Who exactly is that girl?" he asked one of his assistants, who had been quietly managing the event from the sidelines. The assistant consulted her tablet. "Maylin, sir. First-year scholarship student at Westlake. According to her employment file, she's supporting herself entirely. Parents deceased, raised by her grandmother who passed away last year." Kwan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Find out more," he said simply, before turning back to his guests with his host's smile firmly in place. As May served chocolate truffles to guests on the terrace, she kept the conductor's card safely tucked in her pocket, a small rectangle of possibility. Whatever Kwan had intended when he demanded she play, the outcome had not been humiliation but opportunity. She allowed herself a small smile as she offered the dessert tray to the next guest. The night was far from over, but it had already become one she would never forget. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for May. She continued serving drinks and desserts, moving between guests with practiced efficiency. But everything felt different. People looked at her differently now. Some with new respect, others with curiosity, and a few with the uncomfortable recognition that they had misjudged her. Several guests even thanked her for the performance, addressing her by name as if she were suddenly visible to them. By the time the last guest departed and the catering staff began cleaning up, it was well past midnight. May's feet ached, and her arms were tired from carrying trays, but a quiet energy still hummed through her body. The memory of the Steinway's perfect action beneath her fingers, the resonance of those final chords, these sensations stayed with her like after-images. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Luis said as they packed up serving equipment in the kitchen. His earlier frustration had given way to something like admiration. May smiled slightly. "I just did what he asked me to do." "No," Luis shook his head. "You did much more than that. I've worked hundreds of these parties. Rich people love to feel superior. They ask the staff to perform little tricks to entertain them all the time. But nobody ever turns the tables like you did." One of the older servers, a woman named Diane, who had been quiet all night, spoke up. "I recorded some of it on my phone. Hope you don't mind. It was too beautiful not to save." May blinked in surprise. "You recorded it?" Diane nodded. "Just the last minute or so. I can send it to you if you'd like. Yes, please, May said, quickly giving Diane her phone number. Having even a snippet of herself playing that magnificent piano would be a treasure. As the staff filed out through the service entrance, the night air cool on their faces, May's co-workers treated her differently too, with a kind of gentle respect that made her both pleased and slightly uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being noticed. Need a ride home? Louise asked as they reached the street where most of the staff had parked. May shook her head. I take the bus. There's a stop a few blocks from here. Louise frowned. It's almost 2 a.m. The buses don't run this late. I know, May said. I'll call a rideshare. The truth was she couldn't really afford it, but she also couldn't admit that she'd planned to walk the 4 miles home, as she often did after late shifts. Before Louise could respond, a sleek black car pulled up beside them. The window rolled down to reveal Richard Kwan's assistant, the efficient woman who had been managing the event from the shadows all night. Miss Lin, the assistant said, Mr. Kwan would like to speak with you before you leave. A ripple of curiosity went through the remaining staff. Louise raised his eyebrows at May, a silent question. Do you want me to stay? May gave him a small smile. It's fine. Thank you for everything tonight. Call if you need anything, he said quietly before heading to his car. The assistant led May back into the mansion, through rooms now empty of guests and being restored to perfect order by the household staff. They walked to a part of the house May hadn't seen before, eventually stopping at a heavy wooden door. He's in there, the assistant said, gesturing for May to enter. May straightened her rumpled serving uniform, took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was a library, walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, leather chairs arranged around a fireplace where embers still glowed. Richard Kwan sat at a desk near the window, looking out at the lights of the city below. He turned as May entered. Ah, Miss Lin, he said, his tone unreadable. Thank you for coming. Please sit. He gestured to a chair across from him. May sat back straight, hands folded in her lap. She was exhausted but determined not to show it. I owe you an apology, Kwan said, the words coming out as if they were unfamiliar to his mouth. Of all the things May had expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. She remained silent, waiting. I made assumptions about you, he continued, about your abilities, your background, your worth. I was wrong, and I behaved poorly. May nodded slightly, accepting his words without helping him feel better about them. Her grandmother had taught her that forgiveness was a gift, not an obligation. Your playing was exceptional, Kwan said, far beyond what one would expect from a first-year student even at Westlake. Thank you, May said simply. Kwan studied her for a moment. You don't seem very impressed by my apology. I appreciate it, May replied carefully, but I don't think it's me you need to apologize to. Oh? And who would that be? All the other scholarship students you dismissed before you even heard them play. All the people who serve your food and clean your home, who you assume have nothing valuable to offer. All the people you look past every day. May surprised herself with her boldness. Maybe it was the late hour, or the lingering adrenaline from the performance, or simply the fact that after what had happened tonight, she had nothing left to lose with this man. Kwan's eyebrows rose slightly, but instead of anger, something like respect flickered across his face. Interesting perspective, he said. He opened a drawer in his desk and removed an envelope, sliding it across to May. This is for you. May didn't reach for it. What is it? Your catering company charges $3,000 for an event like tonight's. I'm guessing your cut is what, maybe $200? This is $5,000. Consider it a performance fee. May stared at the envelope. The amount was staggering to her, enough to cover rent for months, to fix her ancient laptop, to buy proper winter clothes for the coming cold season. But something felt wrong about it. I wasn't performing as a pianist tonight, she said quietly. I was working as a server. I've already been paid for my work. This isn't charity if that's what you're worried about, Kwan said, a hint of his earlier sharpness returning. I pay for exceptional things. Your playing was exceptional. It's a simple transaction. May thought about it for a long moment, then shook her head. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Kwan, but I can't accept it. Not like this. Pride is an expensive luxury for someone in your position, Kwan observed, studying her with increased interest. Maybe, May agreed, but it's one I can still afford. An unexpected smile flickered across Kwan's face. You continue to surprise me, Miss Lin. He took back the envelope but didn't return it to the drawer. Let me propose something else then. The City Symphony Orchestra has a young artist program. Students selected for it receive mentoring, performance opportunities, and a stipend for education expenses. I happen to sit on the board. May's heart beat faster. Mr. Walsh already gave me his card. Yes, Christopher has a good eye for talent. But the program is highly competitive, with only 3 spots available each year. I could ensure you receive fair consideration. May frowned. Fair consideration is all I've ever wanted. I don't need special treatment. Quan leaned back in his chair. This isn't about special treatment. It's about removing barriers that shouldn't exist in the first place. Let me ask you something. How much practice time do you get each week on a concert-quality piano? The question caught May off guard. We have sign-up sheets for the practice rooms at Westlake. Students can reserve 2 hours per day on the better pianos, but those spots fill up quickly, especially around recital times. And the rest of your practice is done where? I have an old upright in my apartment. The building manager lets me play until 8 p.m. Quan nodded as if confirming a theory. Talented as you are, you're competing against students who have had access to professional instruments their entire lives. Students who don't have to work catering jobs until 2 a.m. and then attend 8 a.m. classes. That's not fair consideration, it's an uneven playing field. May didn't have a response to that. It was a reality she lived with every day but rarely heard acknowledged so directly. My proposal is this, Quan continued. There's a practice studio at the Symphony Center that board members can reserve. It has a Steinway similar to mine. I'll arrange for you to have access to it for 2 hours every day. No strings attached. May felt dizzy at the thought of regular access to such an instrument. It would transform her practice, her playing, her development as an artist. But she was also wary. Why would you do this? Quan was quiet for a moment. Let's call it an investment in potential, or perhaps an attempt to correct an error in judgment. May studied his face, trying to detect any hidden motives. What she saw was a complex man struggling with his own preconceptions, perhaps seeing something of himself in her determination. I'd like that very much, she said finally. Thank you. Quan nodded, businesslike again. My assistant will contact you with the details. Don't waste the opportunity. Miss Lin. I never waste opportunities, Mr. Quan, May said, rising from her chair. As the assistant arranged for a car to take May home, she felt the conductor's business card in her pocket, a tangible reminder of how much had changed in one evening. Tomorrow would bring more classes, more work, more struggle, but also perhaps something new. A path she couldn't have imagined when she'd arrived at the mansion hours earlier with a tray of champagne glasses and an invisible name tag. In the car, May's phone buzzed with a message from Diane. The video of her playing the Moonlight Sonata's final movement had been attached. May watched it in the darkness of the back seat, seeing herself from the outside for the first time. What struck her wasn't just the playing. It was the look of complete certainty on her face, the absence of doubt, the presence of something that transcended the gilded room and the judgment of those watching. For those few minutes at the piano, she had been entirely herself. And somehow, against all odds, that had been enough. The next morning came too quickly. May's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., pulling her from a sleep that had been filled with dreams of pianos and spotlights. Her tiny apartment was cold. She kept the heat low to save on bills, and her body ached from the long night of serving drinks and standing on her feet. For a moment, as she lay there staring at the ceiling, the events of the previous night seemed like a dream themselves. Had she really played Beethoven on a $500,000 Steinway? Had Richard Quan, one of the richest men in the city, really apologized to her and offered her practice time at the Symphony Center? Had Christopher Walsh, the famous conductor, really given her his card? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand and she reached for it, expecting it to be her roommate Lily, who was visiting family for the weekend. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. Good morning, Miss Lin. This is Andrea Chen, Mr. Kwan's personal assistant. Per your conversation last night, I've arranged practice time at Symphony Center from 5 to 7 p.m. daily starting today. Please confirm this works for you. So it hadn't been a dream. May sat up quickly, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. Thank you, she typed back. That works perfectly. How do I access the studio? The response came almost immediately. Your name is on the list at security. Bring ID. Studio 3, 3rd floor. May hugged her knees to her chest, overwhelmed by what this meant. 2 hours every day on a professional-grade piano, the kind of access that even some of Westlake's full-paying students didn't get. It would change everything about her practice routine, her development, her potential progress. But first, she had classes to attend. Rising from bed, May went through her morning routine on autopilot. Quick shower, simple breakfast of oatmeal, careful organization of her music books, and laptop in her worn backpack. As she was about to leave, she remembered the video Diane had sent her. Sitting on the edge of her bed, May watched it again. The shaky phone footage captured only the last minute or so of her performance, the most dramatic part of the third movement, leading into those final, powerful chords. What struck her again was the look on her face. Intense concentration mixed with a kind of freedom she rarely allowed herself to feel. Professor Tanaka's words from their last lesson echoed in her mind. "You play perfectly, May, but sometimes I don't hear you in the music. Where are you hiding?" In the video, she wasn't hiding at all. May tucked her phone away and headed out, catching the bus to Westlake just as the sun was beginning to rise over the city. Despite her lack of sleep, a strange energy carried her through her music theory class and her literature seminar. During her lunch break, she found a quiet corner in the student center and dialed the number on Christopher Walsh's card. A secretary answered, and May almost lost her nerve. Hello. My name is May Lynn. I'm a student at Westlake. Mr. Walsh asked me to call. Yes. Mr. Walsh mentioned you." The secretary's voice warmed. "He'd like to schedule an audition with you for the Young Artist program. Would next Wednesday at 4 p.m. work?" May's heart raced. "An audition, so soon?" "Yes, that works. Thank you." "Excellent. Please prepare 2 contrasting pieces. Total duration not to exceed 15 minutes. The audition will be at Symphony Center, Hall B." After hanging up, May sat motionless, her sandwich forgotten in front of her. The Young Artist program was something most Westlake students only dreamed about. Only 3 students were selected each year, and they received not only mentorship and performance opportunities, but also a stipend that could significantly ease her financial burdens. The rest of the day passed in a blur. During her afternoon piano lesson, Professor Tanaka noticed something different about her playing. "You've found something, haven't you?" the older woman asked, her keen eyes studying May's face. "There's a new confidence in your buck today." May hesitated before telling her teacher about the previous night, the party, Kwan's challenge, the performance that had changed everything. As she spoke, Professor Tanaka's expression shifted from surprise to something like pride. "So, you played for the Wolves and made them listen," she said when May had finished. "Good, and now Walsh wants to hear you?" May nodded. "For the Young Artists program. I have an audition next week. We must prepare properly." Tanaka tapped her pencil against her notepad. "You'll play the Beethoven, of course. It clearly speaks to you. And for contrast," she thought for a moment, "the Chopin Ballade No. 1. It will show your range." May's eyes widened. "The ballade? But that's difficult?" "Yes. Beyond your current repertoire?" "Perhaps, but after what you've told me, I think you're ready to reach further." The vote of confidence from her normally reserved teacher meant almost as much to May as the opportunities that had suddenly appeared before her. When her classes ended at 4:30, May found herself with an unexpected gift, time. Usually she would rush from Westlake to her evening job at a coffee shop near campus, where she worked from 5 to 10 p.m. most days. But she'd called in that morning to request a week off, using some of her saved vacation days. Her manager, who had always been understanding about her school schedule, had agreed without question. Now, instead of steaming milk and making lattes, May was walking into the imposing glass and steel structure of Symphony Center, her student ID in hand. The security guard checked her name against a list, handed her a visitor badge, and directed her to the elevators. Studio 3 was smaller than she'd imagined, a simple room with sound-absorbing panels on the walls, a music stand, a chair, and a Steinway grand piano similar to the one in Kwan's mansion. Not quite as large, but with the same rich ebony finish and the same promise of magnificent sound. May set her bag down carefully and approached the piano with something like reverence. She lifted the fallboard to reveal the keys, pristine ivory and ebony, perfectly aligned and waiting. She sat on the bench, adjusted its height, and placed her hands in position. For the next 2 hours, May lost herself in practice. She worked through the Beethoven piece, refining the sections that had felt rushed during her impromptu performance at Kwan's house. Then she began the more daunting task of preparing the Chopin Ballade, a piece she had studied but never performed with its technical challenges and emotional depth. Time disappeared. There was only the music, the feel of the responsive action beneath her fingers, the rich tones filling the small space. She barely noticed when the door opened slightly and someone paused to listen before quietly departing. When her practice time ended, May reluctantly gathered her things. As she was about to leave, she noticed a small envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a note written in elegant handwriting. "Your playing brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for sharing your gift. Eleanor Walsh." Christopher Walsh's wife, a former concert pianist herself, had apparently overheard her practicing. May tucked the note carefully into her music folder, a small treasure to add to the growing collection of unexpected affirmations. The week that followed took on a dreamlike quality. By day, May attended her classes, worked with Professor Tanaka on perfecting her audition pieces, and maintained her normal routine. By evening, she practiced in the sanctuary of Studio 3, her playing growing stronger and more confident with each session. On the third day, she arrived to find a small basket outside the studio door. Inside were fresh fruits, chocolate-covered almonds, bottled water, and a container of hot tea. A small card read simply, "Fuel for your practice. RK." Richard Kwan, in his own way, was continuing to support her without interfering. May shared the food with the janitorial staff she'd befriended, an older man named Roberto who stayed late to clean the practice rooms and often stopped to listen outside her door. "You play like my mother used to," he told her one evening as they shared the chocolates. "She was a pianist in Mexico City before we moved here. She always said music should make you feel like your heart is too big for your chest. That's how your playing feels." These small connections, the note from Eleanor Walsh, the quiet appreciation from Roberto, the growing recognition from fellow students who had somehow heard about her performance at Kwan's mansion, the video Diane had taken had made its way around campus and all, added to May's growing sense that her world was expanding in ways she couldn't have imagined. The night before her audition, May stayed late at the practice studio, working until her fingers ached and her mind was saturated with music. As she finally packed up her belongings near midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from Professor Tanaka. "Remember, they are not judging you. You are sharing your gift with them. Sleep well, play beautifully, and know that whatever happens tomorrow, you have already won an important battle." May read the message twice, letting its wisdom sink in. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But tonight, as she walked home under a sky scattered with stars, she felt something new and unfamiliar, a sense of possibility unrestricted by the limitations she had always accepted as fixed. The morning of the audition arrived with gentle rain tapping against May's window. She had slept surprisingly well, waking before her alarm with a calm sense of purpose. Today would determine many things about her future, but strangely, she felt ready in a way she never had before. As she went through her morning routine, May thought about how much had changed in just 1 week. The video of her playing at Kwan's mansion had spread further than she'd expected. Her fellow students at Westlake now greeted her in the hallways. Professors who had barely noticed her before suddenly knew her name, and even the dean had stopped her yesterday to wish her luck with the audition. "You know, in my 30 years at this institution, we've only had 4 students accepted into the Young Artists program," he had said with unexpected warmth. "It would be wonderful to add a 5th. May spent the morning in classes trying to focus on lectures while her mind kept drifting to the pieces she would play later. At lunch, she found a quiet practice room and ran through sections of both works, not playing full out but simply keeping her fingers warm and her mind engaged with the music. Professor Tanaka met her for a final coaching session at 2 p.m. Instead of their usual intensive work, the older woman simply listened as May played portions of both pieces. "Enough," Tanaka said after 20 minutes. "Your technique is as ready as it will be. Now we must prepare your mind." She poured tea from a thermos into 2 small cups, handing one to May. "Tell me, what are you afraid of today?" The question caught May off guard. She sipped the hot tea, gathering her thoughts. "I'm afraid of making technical mistakes, of forgetting passages I've played perfectly 100 times, of letting nervousness ruin everything." Tanaka nodded. "These are the usual fears." "What else?" May looked down at her hands. I'm afraid of failing after all this attention, of disappointing people who suddenly believe in me. And deeper still, May was quiet for a long moment. I'm afraid of succeeding, she said finally, surprising herself with the admission of what it might mean, of how it might change things. If I actually get this opportunity, then you would have to fully become the musician you are meant to be. Tanaka finished for her. No more hiding behind your circumstances or limitations. No more excuses about inadequate instruments or lack of time. Tears pricked at May's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. Yes, Professor Tanaka set down her tea. May, do you know why I accepted you as my student? I have refused many technically proficient players over the years. May shook her head. Because when you played in your audition for Westlake, on that terrible upright piano in the back practice room, the one with the sticky keys, you played as if nothing else existed but the music. Not the inadequate instrument, not the scholarship committee watching you, not even your own fear. There was an honesty in your playing that cannot be taught. She reached out and took May's hands in her own. Today, play for that girl, the one who had nothing but her love of music. Not for the committee, not for me, not for Mr. Kwan or Mr. Walsh or anyone else who has suddenly taken notice of you. Play for her. At 3:30, May left campus and took a bus to Symphony Center, her best dress and a pair of borrowed performance shoes in a garment bag over her arm. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming in afternoon sunlight. Symphony Center looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more alive with people coming and going. May checked in with security and was directed to a small dressing room where she could change and prepare. As she slipped into her simple black dress, the only formal attire she owned, May heard the sounds of another audition in progress. Through the walls came the faint notes of a violin playing what sounded like a Paganini caprice, technically brilliant and precisely executed. Her heart sank slightly. She would be competing against players like that, musicians who had probably trained at prestigious pre-college programs, who had the best teachers and instruments from childhood, who had never had to work catering jobs or worry about making rent. Then she remembered Professor Tanaka's words and took a deep breath. None of that mattered now. She was here in this moment with the music she loved. That was enough. At precisely 3:55, an assistant knocked on her door. Miss Lin? They're ready for you now. Hall B was smaller than the main concert hall but still impressive, with seating for about 300 people. Today only 5 seats were occupied. The audition committee members, including Christopher Walsh at the center. Mee recognized 2 others, Eleanor Walsh, whose note had meant so much to her, and surprisingly Richard Kwan, sitting slightly apart from the others. May walked to the center of the stage and bowed slightly. Good afternoon. I am May Lin from Westlake Music Academy. I will be playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, 3rd movement, followed by Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Walsh nodded, his expression neutral but not unkind. Whenever you're ready, Miss Lin. May sat at the piano, another beautiful Steinway, and took a moment to adjust the bench. She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes briefly, and then began the Beethoven. The opening arpeggios filled the hall with their urgent energy. This time, unlike at Kwan's house, May wasn't playing to prove anything to anyone. She was playing because this music had lived inside her for years, because these notes had become part of her, because this was the language in which she could speak most truthfully. She moved through the piece with precision, but also with freedom, allowing the music to breathe and speak through her. When she finished the final chords, there was a brief silence before Walsh said simply, "Please continue with the Chopin." Without allowing herself to worry about how the committee had received the Beethoven, May moved directly into the Ballade. Where the Beethoven had been all fire and technical brilliance, the Chopin demanded something different: storytelling, emotional depth, the ability to make the piano sing one moment and storm the next. As May played, she forgot about the committee, forgot about the stakes of this audition, forgot even about the difficulties that had shaped her journey. There was only the music, its questions and answers, its whispers and cries, its moments of tender beauty and unleashed power. When the final notes of the ballade echoed through the hall, May sat motionless for a moment, returning slowly to the present moment. She looked up to see all 5 committee members watching her intently. "Thank you, Miss Lin," Walsh said, his voice giving away nothing. "We appreciate your performance today. Results will be announced next week." May stood, bowed again, and left the stage on slightly unsteady legs. In the dressing room, she changed quickly back into her regular clothes, eager to be outside, to breathe, to process what had just happened. As she was about to leave Symphony Center, a voice called her name. She turned to see Richard Kwan approaching. "Mr. Kwan," she said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm not officially on the committee," he said. "Just observing. I hope that didn't make you nervous." Mee shook her head. "Once I started playing, I didn't really see who was there." A faint smile crossed his face. "That's what makes you different, I think. The others today, all technically accomplished, some brilliantly so, they were playing for us. You were playing for the music itself." May didn't know how to respond to that. It was perhaps the greatest compliment she had ever received, and it had come from the most unexpected source. "I won't ask you how you think it went," Kwan continued. "That's not fair to you. But I will say this. Whatever happens with this program, your future as a musician is secure. There are other opportunities, other paths. Don't let this one moment define you." "Thank you," May said, genuinely touched by his words. "That means a lot. Your practice time at Studio 3 remains available to you, regardless of the committee's decision," he added. "Consider it an open invitation." As she left the building, May felt lighter somehow. The audition was over. She had played her best. Whatever came next, she would face it. The next 6 days were among the longest of May's life. She returned to her classes, her practice routine, even her job at the coffee shop. Her friends and teachers asked how the audition had gone, and she answered honestly that she didn't know, that she had played her best, but the competition was fierce. On the 7th day, as May was wiping down tables between the morning and lunch rushes, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello, Miss Lynn," came the now familiar voice of Walsh's secretary. "Mr. Walsh would like to see you at Symphony Center today at 1 p.m. Can you make it?" May's heart raced. Yes, I'll be there." Her manager, seeing her face, didn't even ask questions when May requested to leave early. "Go," he said simply. "Whatever it is, it looks important." This time, May was shown not to Hall B but to Christopher Walsh's office, a warm space filled with books, records, and photographs of the conductor with famous musicians from around the world. Walsh himself rose from behind his desk as she entered. "Miss Lynn, thank you for coming on such short notice." "Thank you for seeing me," May replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Walsh didn't keep her in suspense. "I'm pleased to inform you that you've been accepted into the Young Artists program. Your audition was exceptional. The committee was unanimous in their decision." The words took a moment to register. "I thank you. I'm honored. You'll be one of 3 young musicians working with us this year," Walsh continued. "The program includes weekly masterclasses, performance opportunities with the orchestra, and a stipend to help with your education expenses." As he outlined the details, May felt a strange sense of calm acceptance. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Another step on a journey that had taken an unexpected turn. The night a billionaire had tried to humiliate her and instead had opened a door. When she left Walsh's office, May found Richard Kwan waiting in the hallway. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You already knew," she realized. He nodded. "I didn't want to spoil the moment for you." They walked together toward the exit. An unlikely pair, the billionaire and the scholarship student, connected by music and a moment of transformation. "You know," Kwan said as they reached the doors, "when I asked you to play that night, I thought I was teaching you a lesson about your place in the world." May looked up at him. "And instead?" "Instead," he said with unexpected humility, "you taught me one about mine." Outside, the afternoon sun painted the city gold. Malin stepped into the light, carrying her future in her hands.